Rapper Mystikal was recently arrested for allegations of rape and false imprisonment. Let's get into the details. My name is Jamahl Kersey. I'm the principal attorney at Kersey Law, a boutique criminal defense firm in San Diego, California. And in this video, we're talking about Michael Tyler, who is better known as the rapper Mystikal, former No Limit soldier. He was arrested on July 31st. And so before we get into this video, I just want to say a special shout out and thank you to all of you who have recommended my firm to people who are facing criminal charges. I really can't thank you enough. And really, that's why I haven't uploaded in a couple of weeks. It's been a couple of weeks since I shot the last video, but we've been getting so busy with cases and people inquiring about hiring us that it's been hard to get in front of the camera and shoot these videos. But hey, that's a good problem to have. I'm not complaining over here. But yeah, let's get into it. So Mystikal is facing charges of first-degree rape, domestic abuse battery, so strangulation, false imprisonment, simple robbery, and simple criminal damage to property. So a long list of offenses that you don't want to be facing. And so the way this came about was the alleged victim actually ended up in the hospital where she reported a sexual assault. And so if you didn't already know, hospital personnel, they are mandatory reporters. So whenever they have a patient come in and they've been a victim of an assault or a domestic violence situation or a sexual assault, they're mandatory reporters. So they have to let the authorities know. And so that's what ended up happening in this case. The hospital personnel called the police and the police sent detectives over who ended up taking her statement. So the alleged victim ended up indicating that she was a victim and that Mystikal was the person who actually sexually assaulted her. And she gave a whole story about what ended up happening. She said she went to Michael Tyler's house and they were discussing some sort of financial arrangement that they had going on. We haven't heard any details about what that financial arrangement exactly was, but she goes to the house and everything is normal until all of a sudden he just kind of flips the script and ends up taking her keys. He ends up choking her and pulling her hair. And she indicated that she sustained injuries during this attack. When we look at taking of keys, you might think, well, how bad is taking a person's keys? Well, that actually can be a false imprisonment charge. So a lot of people haven't heard of false imprisonment, but really false imprisonment is just restricting a person's movement, right? So if you are restricting a person's movement by way of keeping them locked inside of a room or locked inside of a closet, or in this situation, taking a person's keys is also going to restrict movement. If he took her keys, then she wouldn't be able to leave, right? She can't get into her car and take off. If she were to leave, she wouldn't be able to get into her house because he has her keys. So that, if believed, would be sufficient to sustain a charge of false imprisonment. And then the choking and the pulling of hair go without saying that would be some sort of assault. And so it kind of gets weird from here because she says that after he did these things, he then apologizes and starts praying with her. So he apologizes for the conduct and then he starts praying with her. And then it turns into him getting a bottle of rubbing alcohol and basically pouring it on her to remove bad spirits, right? So after he then, removes her bad spirits, he then proceeds to rape her. So this is just, as I'm reading through this story, it is a very bizarre set of facts that, he's taking her belongings, pulling her hair and on choking her, then praying with her, and then pouring rubbing alcohol on her to remove bad spirits, and then says, okay, well, I'm going to rape her. Again, these are allegations. Nothing has been proved yet, but this is what she reported to the police. So he's been arrested and charged with these offenses. However, he enjoys the presumption of innocence. He is innocent unless and until he's proven guilty, and that would be by him admitting guilt, so changing his plea from not guilty to guilty, or being found guilty after a trial in front of a jury. Since neither of those things have happened yet, he is in fact innocent. As a defense attorney, I've got to look at what the possible defenses are. And so since we have, what was admittedly some sort of financial arrangement between this alleged victim and Mystikal, let's just say, perhaps she owed him money and he wanted his money. And so perhaps to get out of this situation, knowing that he's had priors relating to sexual assault, this is definitely something that she could potentially use against him in order to, if he's locked up, right? If he's in custody, it's going to be difficult for him to collect on whatever money that she might have owed him, if that's the case. But that's just pure speculation. But what might be a more concrete defense situation would be consent. So if she's alleging that he raped her, and again, the pulling of the hair, the choking, listen, if his position was that anything that happened between them sexually was consensual, then that's an outright defense to a rape charge. Consent is an absolute defense to rape. So if he's saying, hey, listen, everything was consensual, even, the choking, which can leave marks, but, choking and pulling of hair, listen, that can be part of sexual activity. And he could, his position could be that all these things were done consensually. In terms of the keys, I don't know, what was on those key rings, if they were hers, if perhaps, she had one of his keys on the ring. She had said that there was some sort of financial arrangement between them. And so if she happened to have a key to one of his properties or something like that, and he wanted his keys back and the keys were on her key ring, then that could have been why, he ended up taking her keys. But again, all this stuff is in the air at this point, and his lawyer will have an opportunity to go through the reports with him and have him be able to say, hey, this is a lie. This is an exaggeration. This is not true. This is actually how this went down, whatever his position is. And then from there, his defense attorney will be able to enter in negotiations with the DA in order to figure out how this case is ultimately going to resolve. But this case was in fact put in front of a grand jury. So the DA puts cases in front of a grand jury, and they serve as both the prosecutor and the defense attorney. So they put forth the evidence that they believe points to the defendant's guilt, but then they also put exculpatory evidence, or in other words, evidence that points to their innocence. And then ultimately the grand jury decides whether there's probable cause or reason to believe that a crime has been committed and the person accused committed that crime. So when this case was put in front of the grand jury, they did return an indictment. So they at least found that there was probable cause for him to have sexually assaulted a woman and held her against her will, and basically the first-degree rape charge. So at that first hearing is going to be the arraignment, and the not guilty plea is going to be entered. You pretty much would never enter a guilty plea at an arraignment, especially not in a case this serious, if for nothing else, because you haven't received any of the evidence. So the alleged victim's statement, photographs, videos, she probably ended up getting a rape kit. As the defendant in the case, he has a right to review all that information and go through that with his attorney. The not guilty plea is going to be entered, and then they're going to address bail. And the two primary things that the judge is concerned with when addressing bail is whether the person is going to be a flight risk or a danger to the community. So flight risk being if he's going to show up to court. Listen, we already know that Mystikal had a sexual assault prior. He already did 6 years. He could be facing a significant amount of time in this situation, which is going to heighten the judge's worry that he might not show up to court. The other issue would be the danger to the community. Might there be some sort of danger to the community? Is the public safety at risk with this person being out of custody? And so we know that the second time that he was arrested for sexual assault, that case was ultimately dismissed. But again, he had the prior conviction, and now he's being charged with similar offenses relating to sexual assault. Any judge is going to be very concerned about that type of conduct, and it's not really surprising that he would deny bond. And so going back to his prior offenses, because the judge absolutely looks at criminal history when considering bond. So in 2003, he did plead guilty to sexual battery. And so you probably remember the story. It was just such a bizarre set of facts. And I remember just being in disbelief when I heard about the situation. But Mystikal and his bodyguards had ultimately accused his former hairstylist of cashing $80,000 worth of checks. So basically committing fraud. So they threatened to go to the police over these stolen checks. And so if you think about it, listen, stealing $80,000 would absolutely be a felony and could land you in jail or even prison. So we're talking about a serious threat that they made in terms of reporting her to the authorities. But what they said is that, hey, if you perform oral sex on all of us, then we won't report report you to the police. And so she ultimately ended up doing that. And you can just imagine how humiliating and just disgusting of a situation that would have been. She did it. There was actually videotape of this sexual assault. And, really, I just don't understand this idea of recording these type of things. Obviously, it's one thing to go as far as to sexual assault a woman or even sexually assault a man. But to then, record it and keep evidence of it just is really bizarre to me. But that's what happened. And so Mystikal ended up getting charged with aggravated rape and extortion. So these were very serious charges in that, in Louisiana, where this ended up going down, aggravated rape carries a mandatory life sentence without parole. So if he had gone to trial and was found guilty of aggravated rape, he basically would have spent the rest of his life in prison. And Mystikal actually ended up doing some proactive work that really would have been highly advisable. I'm sure his attorney had told him to do this, but he ended up doing sexual assault counseling and he was doing community service. These are the types of things that can look really good to a DA and to a judge to show that you are proactively taking steps to acknowledge your responsibility, showing that you take this situation seriously. If you have a drug case, inpatient therapy, if there are alcohol issues, you can do AA, really, again, doing these things where you're not ordered by the court and you're just doing them on your own to show that you take these things seriously. Judges and DAs are not only concerned with giving the proper punishment to fit the crime, but also making sure that something like this is never going to happen again. And so one way that you can really, grab the reins on showing that one of these things is not going to happen again is by demonstrating that, hey, you're enrolled in therapy. You already have 30 sessions under your belt with a therapist or AA or NA, these types of things. So that's what he ended up doing. As part of the plea agreement, he ended up in a situation where his max would only be 10 years versus, life without the possibility of parole. Given the circumstances, was an amazing deal. And one of the motivators for the prosecutors in that case was the fact that they had this victim. They had a victim who had been basically humiliated in the worst way, so forced to perform oral sex on 3 different men, and it was recorded, right? And so if this were to have gone to trial, not only would she have to testify about what happened and relive that situation for the whole public to see, but the videotape recording would also be played as well because, she would have been subjected to cross-examination. And if the defense tried to put forth some sort of theory that she was making it up or she didn't, she wanted to do it or anything like that, then the prosecution would definitely be in a position where they would have to play that tape. And so she would have to testify about it, relive it, but also, know that the jury and the public is going to see this video of her performing oral sex on 3 different men. And so prosecutors are sensitive to that and definitely don't want to put their victims through having to testify if they can avoid it. So that was a part of the reasoning why they were able to reach such a favorable deal for Mystikal in that case. And so in that case, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison, and the judge had indicated on the record that he actually wanted to give him 10 years, which would have been the max on that charge, but ultimately allowed for the 6-year sentence. And so he was also required to register as a sex offender, and that was going to be a lifelong registration requirement. So he has that on his record going into this new case. In between, in 2017, he was actually arrested on rape charges, and he was actually held in custody for a year and a half on that case. So there had been an initial grand jury proceedings in which the grand jury returned an indictment. However, later in the case, new evidence had emerged, and ultimately when that was presented in front of a grand jury, they did not return an indictment. So in that situation, the DA exercised their discretion and dismissed the case against him. So this is a really serious ordeal for Mystikal. Listen, when you already have a prior sexual assault conviction and then you get arrested a second time for similar type conduct, the proposed sentences don't get better. They actually get worse because now you have priors. So it's not really looking good for Mystikal at this point. But again, remember, he has the presumption of innocence. There may be some sort of solid defense that, gets him out of this whole thing. we'll end up seeing what happens. But that's it for now. And if you got something out of this video, please be sure to hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Turn on those notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching. And until next time, peace.